Right, so that should be recorded now. So we'll make a start. So hi everyone, thanks for joining and welcome to another edition of our BI and data webinar sessions brought to you by Robert Walters. Today we're joined by Helen Blaikie, previous CDO, Director of Data Analytics, and she's going to be discussing the case for data literacy. Now, before I pass you over to Helen, just a little bit of info about me. We just have the next slide, Helen. So for those of you who don't know me or may not have joined before, my name's Chris Ingman. Sorry, Helen, we just had the next slide up. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, my name's Chris Ingman. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So so for those who don't know me, I'm a senior recruitment consultant over at Robert Walters. I look after the BI and data market. I'm also the lead of Power BI user group, in addition to the co-organizer of the Manchester Power BI user group alongside my colleague Alex Taylor. So if you are in a position at the moment where you're looking for something new, or alternatively, if you're looking to grow the team out, want to know a bit more about the market, trends, average salaries, tech, etc., feel free to get in touch. My details are at the bottom here, so email me, phone me, whatever's easiest for you. I've just had the next slide, Helen. So before we get started, again, I just wanted to give you a bit of information about the events we're holding. So many of you might know Robert Walters, the business. We used to do at least a lot of physical events, but due to COVID, it's obviously put a halt to that. So we've been focusing a lot of our efforts on webinar and online sessions. So what I've put together recently is a mini-series, 4-part mini-series regarding how to implement BI into your business, modern BI, should I say. A typical question we're asked all the time is, look, we want to implement BI, we want to really improve it, but we don't know how to do it. We get a lot of roles, that greenfield roles, looking for someone to be all-encompassing, but like I say, I thought it would be relevant to set up a series, just kind of guiding people. A very brief overview is how to do that, basically, how to set up a BI function. So here we have various different speakers from Richard Hyde, KPMG, Matt Darwin, and Lewis Holmes, and it's all about how to lay the foundations of a successful BI function, build a modern data warehouse architecture in Azure and AWS, and finally implementing and rolling out Power BI. So these are all pre-recorded, they're all live now. So what I'll do is I'll put a link on our meetup page for you all to join that, and feel free to view it at your leisure. And just the next slide, please, Helen. Just a bit of information about the next event we're going on. Apologies, I've just realised that I've not put the date or time on this event, but it will be on Thursday, the 10th of December at 12:30. Another live event, so it'll be joined by Matt Tubb. He's Senior Solutions Architect over at Capgemini, sorry. He'll be giving an overview of the data mesh and its use within an analytics environment. So look out for that. And obviously, we realise at the moment, some people are working, some people aren't, some people are busier than others. So we will record each session, but it will be a live session. It'll be going out 12:30 around lunchtime. And just the next slide, Helen. But that's everything from me, really. So I'll let Helen get going. So just throughout the webinar, can you just all do me a favour and keep your video and mics off? It just makes things obviously run a bit smoother. I'll be manning the chat box, so any questions you might have, just feel free to put in there, and I'll pass them over to Helen at the end. That's it from me. So I hope you all enjoy the session, and over to Helen.
Thanks for that, Chris. Thanks for the opportunity to share on a topic that's quite close to my heart. It's been a bit of a crazy week this week in terms of COVID isolation, kids running around going crazy. So if you hear any strange noises, firstly, apologies. If it's not as fluent as I thought it was going to be, again, apologies for that. It's my first time doing a webinar where you can't see anybody, you can't see any reactions. So I'll try to keep it as fluid as possible and hopefully not too dry. It's great that everybody can join us. I think we've got about 20 people on the webinar today. So we're going to talk about data literacy, and really to truly make the case for data literacy, we need to understand firstly what it is, why it's important, the opportunities, I guess, if we do achieve a level of data literacy, and conversely the implications if we don't. So these are things that we'll probably cover off today within the next half an hour, and hopefully provide you with some food for thought in helping your own journey in becoming data driven. But also to help if any of you are preparing a case for data literacy in your own organisation. I have some expertise in this area. However, I'm sure there's loads of people listening on this webinar who do too, and I'm keen to encourage discussion, comments, further thoughts and questions, as Chris said, through the chat box. I know it's quite difficult when you're just using a chat box, but please do feel free to add any comments or anything that you think might help the group. So who am I then? Try to keep the photo. My name is Blaikie. I'm currently a freelance data consultant offering CDO as a service, data literacy enablement as a service to organisations, really to help them start on their data journey to become more data driven. So I guess what does that mean in practice? What we're finding at the moment in the marketplace is that lots of organisations are either not willing to invest in senior data leadership to drive data literacy, or just can't afford it at this moment in time. So I'm on the market at the moment. So what I'm doing in the process is using my skills to work with organisations to give them some time to really start to drive these sorts of things within the organisation. So I guess, how did I get into data? Well, you can see my background, as I'm sure many of you who are on this webinar have done. I've come from one of the classic areas that uses data to deliver insight to make decisions within a business, and that's finance. I've worked for many large blue chip organisations across many sectors, and some of the brands I'm sure you will recognise on this slide. And I've also worked cross-functionally as well. So I've worked in finance, I've worked in sales, business development, and also most latterly data and analytics and business intelligence roles. And I think for me, it's a powerful combination. I've been able to understand organisations' business models and key levers and drivers to performance, as well as the commercial landscape in which these organisations operate, and then finally how to use data to deliver against these business outcomes. It's clear that data isn't technology these days, and I think those organisations which understand this are those ones who are going to gain competitive advantage. It's really about understanding the business, the strategic outcomes in which they wish to achieve, and then really using data to solve those specific problems. Technology is merely an enabler. So for me personally, I don't think it's held me back in delivering in the data space by not being a techie myself. So I guess I'm what you would call a second generation CDO. But I do really admire those first generation CDOs who have started in tech and then really developed into the data space to understand the business problems and where data can help solve these problems. So in summary, I guess I work as an associate for several agencies as well who are also on there, and also freelance, helping organisations define, shape and execute their data and analytics and BI strategies to leverage data to drive value and business outcomes. So a bit of a shameless plug, but obviously if anybody wants any help with those, then please feel free to contact me. So into the nuts and bolts of what we're due to talk about today. So data literacy. What is data literacy? I guess before we get into what data literacy is per se, it's probably useful to add some context against the world of data as it is today. I'm sure we all know this, however, and when we're making a case for data literacy, it's often worth stepping back and reminding the decision makers that we're dealing with of the wider context. The world is full of data. We've heard the phrase, I think everybody's heard that. I think it was a guy called Clive Humby back in 2006, data is the new oil. I personally disagree with that. I think oil is finite, whereas as long as there are human beings around, we will always have an infinite number and an infinite amount of data. We're now producing more data every 24 hours than all the data that has ever been created cumulatively in the years before the early 2020s. So as data leaders, we all know why it's important and why it's important for organisations. So just some stats. I haven't put them on the slides, but Gartner is also always a very, very useful place to go to understand what's happening in the marketplace. And it's always good to have some of these stats when you're building your case for data literacy. So Gartner said that by 2022, 90% of corporate strategies will explicitly mention information as a critical enterprise asset, and also data and analytics as an essential competency. So I'm sure you guys are all aware, people who are on this webinar and also work for organisations that talk about being data driven or data centric. It's the absolute, seems to be the buzzwords at the moment. Everybody wants to be data driven and data centric in terms of using data to drive business outcomes. But really, how many of these statements are backed up by tangible data strategies and measurable outcomes to determine the success of these? I think, Chris, that's probably a subject for another webinar in terms of data strategies, and probably not one I'll touch upon too much today, but certainly something that's important for a lot of organisations. The other thing that Gartner said is that by 2023, data literacy will become an explicit and necessary driver of business value, demonstrated by its inclusion in these data strategies that I've talked about before, and it will be included in over 80% of data strategies and also change management programs. The thing is, becoming data-driven isn't easy. It's really, really hard. And it combines a combination of both what I call aptitude and attitude. So it's a combination of skills via data literacy, but also a combination of culture. And I think therefore, as CDOs and as data leaders, we absolutely need to become change agents to advocate this in the organisation. The last part of some Gartner research that I will talk about before we move on is that, interestingly, they've highlighted for the past 3 years, cultural challenges to the acceptance of change and poor data literacy have been amongst the top 3 obstacles to the success of data and analytics teams. And that was according to the respondents of a recent Chief Data Officers survey. So unless we get this right, and unless we actually bridge the gap and encourage data literacy, our data and analytics teams just will not be successful. So it really encourages a organisational change to really measure how we do this. And we as CDOs and as data leaders need to promote a cultural change to act as role models in terms of how we actually address this. Obviously, moving on to the global pandemic that we're in, the importance of data has accelerated. Organisations can no longer rely on gut feel to take decisions, but really need to be asking themselves what the data says to be able to respond with agility to the changing marketplace. Obviously, that in itself, as data people, we know that presents a problem because the challenges of historic models of performance, they can no longer predict future performance. And at the rate that change is accelerating, the organisations that are going to win are going to be the ones that use data, have it in a usable format, make sure it's accessible, and above all, have the skills and talent to be able to interpret data in an agile and adaptive way. So I guess I haven't really described what data literacy is. That's the backdrop. So let's move on to what we think data literacy is. So again, this comes from Gartner. And this is really how they define data literacy. I actually prefer, I don't know if anybody's seen the MIT definition, but the Massachusetts Institute of Technology defined data literacy as the ability to read, work with, and argue with data. For me, in my simple head, that makes it a lot more simple. Gartner takes it a little bit further, and as you can see from this slide, it describes data literacy as the ability to read, write, communicate with data in context, and also goes on to describe a little more what that means from a data perspective in terms of constructs, analytical methods and techniques. But informally, basically what it is can you speak data? Is data a second language for you? And is it natural for you? Senior leaders in organisations, you've probably seen this golden triangle before, certainly the one on the left, the people, process, technology. It's something that's fundamental to any successful transformation, and senior leaders will be familiar with this. However, I think what we should do as data leaders, and we need to put data into the heart of this, and it's an absolute critical capability of any organisation. So your people, your process, your technology, where is data at the heart of that? And it's absolutely key as we move into the fourth and the fifth industrial revolution. And it's no longer true to just consider the first three. We absolutely need to consider data. So I guess, why is data literacy important? I don't know if any of you know who this is. The clue's at the top of the slide, I guess. This is Barbara Bush. She was the first lady in the US, and when she was preparing to become the first lady, she was really looking at what are the causes that I really could support in this role, be it homelessness, crime, hunger, drug abuse. And she came to the conclusion that improving literacy was the key to equality and opportunity within the society. And if she did this, she could indirectly reduce homelessness, crime, hunger, drug abuse, etc. So she set up the Family Literacy Foundation, which really allowed improved literacy for children and families in deprived areas. And I really like this comparison, because I think the same applies to organisations in their aspiration to become truly data-driven. If we don't give our teams the ability to become data literate through focused programmes and allow them to speak data as a second language, I think we'll really miss the opportunity of any of the value and the investment in tools and technology. How many of you have spent hundreds of £1,000s on a shiny new toy and a shiny new visualization tool, be it Power BI, be it ClickView, be it ClickSense, Tableau, etc., etc. There's so many of them in the market at the moment. But if we put one of those in without giving people the tools to be able to use them and really develop a culture of data, we massively miss an opportunity to succeed. Imagine your organisation where the marketing department speak French, finance speak German, the data analytics team speak Spanish, and nobody really speaks a second language. Even if you've set up your organisation with digital in mind, communicating any business value and specific technologies would be absolutely impossible, leads to common language barriers and frustrations that will be inevitable. How many times have you actually seen somebody, or actually done it yourself, where you found a great piece of insight from your data, but it just gets lost in translation because the recipients that you're presenting to are just unable to understand what you're showing you, or some smart aleck in the corner of the boardroom actually starts to break down the definition. So what is a customer? Your definition of a customer isn't the same as my definition of customer. So you really get trapped within that noise of trying to understand some of the metrics, arguing about data quality. Well, my spreadsheet doesn't say the same as your spreadsheet, and where have you got that data from? There's just so much noise around the board table often that really detracts from getting to the true value of that data. So as organisations strive to become more data-driven, then a lack of data literacy becomes an inhibitor to growth. More statistics for you, but so I mentioned Click earlier. Click and Accenture did a study where they actually saw that there was a proven correlation with corporate performance. So data-driven companies are associated with a 3 to 5% increase in enterprise value over their peers. A professor at the Wharton Business School and author of Click's Data Literacy Index found that the business opportunity for data is underpinned by three data elements: improving data accessibility, stronger data skills, and a culture that empowers data-driven decision-making. So you can see some of the respondents of another piece of research from Forrester here, that actually people don't understand why they need data. They spend a lot of time, and there's a lot of lack of productivity in the marketplace, which is costing billions across companies as a whole, just because people have an inability to work with data. It causes them stress, they're overwhelmed with it. Lots of people spend time procrastinating on tasks that demand data analysis because they don't really know how to use the tools. They don't really want to use the tools. And actually, they're probably overwhelmed with too much data because the data isn't really tailored to them. And 14% of respondents in the same survey said that they'd avoid a data-related job if they could help it. So fundamentally, any part of a data strategy for an organisation needs to understand all of this people, process and technology and really put it in the heart of the hands of the people who need to know how to use it. BI tools these days are all for democratising data, putting data in the hands of employees rather than centralised teams of data experts that there used to be. However, to do that, we need to make sure that employees are confident in this new language by ensuring the accessibility, the relevance, the timeliness of data without being overwhelmed by the ability, the volume of data. So something that I thought was quite interesting in terms of self-service. So we talked about shiny new BI tools, and BI tools themselves are not enough. So I saw a quote. This was from a guy called Jordan Morrow, who's the global head of data literacy at Click. They've been very strong advocates for data literacy. And if you Google and you YouTube, there's loads and loads of resources out there in terms of data literacy. But he said that if you just put self-service out there without self-sufficiency, it's like going fishing and expecting the fish to jump out for you. You really need to frame it with giving people the tools. Don't just launch a new tool and expect non-data people to be as excited as we data geeks are at launching this shiny new tool. We need to work with them. We need to give them the tools to understand. We need to give them a framework. We need to make sure that they only have the data that is appropriate for them. Don't just put all the data out there, because they will become overwhelmed and they just won't know where to start. Make sure that you've got role-based access control in place so that people can only see the levels of data that you want them to see, and just avoid that overwhelming blocks of really hindering data literacy. So what does good data literacy look like? I guess fundamentally, it needs to be at the heart of any data-driven culture. You won't achieve a data-driven culture without having data literacy. That's key. And it has to be aligned to a digital transformation program as a key enabler to that data and analytics strategy. I'm a great advocate for data strategies. And if you look at the fundamentals of a good data strategy, then they are all underpinned by data literacy. So absolutely critical is, have you got an exec champion? Who is the person that is fighting your corner at the top? You absolutely need those data advocates within the business, and not at middle management level. It has to be around that board table. You need to have a sponsor at the board table. So if you're not that person, find yourself somebody within the teams who really gets it, who really wants to understand the data. They might not know how to get there. However, there's lots of organisations that can help you get there, but you do really need that champion. It needs to come from the top. And then I guess the levels of data literacy vary depending on the roles within the organisation. So it's not a one size fits all. Some people are just consumers of data, and so they want reports, dashboards, models and applications. And really where we need them to get to is they need to be able to ask the right questions to foster that critical thinking. They need to be able to articulate business scenarios, decisions and outcomes, and understand how data and analytics can enable them. They need to understand the difference between correlation and causality, because actually it's very, very dangerous putting data into the hands of the uninitiated. If they really don't understand the difference between the cause and the correlation, you could get into a lot of trouble. In fact, let me just jump to something that I find quite interesting. I'm sure loads of you have seen this before, but this is a really interesting piece of analysis that that a data scientist did around correlation and causality. So he decided to look at the number of films that Nicolas Cage had appeared in, and then also look at the number of people who drowned falling into a pool. And what he actually found is that there was correlation between the two. However, just because there's a correlation doesn't really lead to causality. Really strange, but I thought it was quite interesting, really, to just show that. So in terms of good data literacy, we talked about consumers, what they need to know. They need to understand a little bit about data privacy, security, ethics, bias and risks as well. So they need to understand and share, I guess, in some of our pain as data professionals. But for the creators and for the data and analytics professionals themselves, there are also another lot of concepts that are important. So data scientists, data engineers, data managers, can they communicate productively to the non-initiated in terms of data? Can they storytell with data? Do they understand the diversity of data sources? Can they automate analytics and embed them within business workflow? And can they use the full range of BI analytics, machine learning and AI methods that are out there? Can they tell impactful stories with data visualization and data techniques? So essentially, that is what I would say good data literacy looks like. However, one of the things that I've done in previous organisations as well is use competency frameworks and use competency matrices to really understand what was good data literacy look like for employees. So knowledge, skills, attitude and behaviours are absolutely key. And clearly, as I mentioned before, it depends on the level of the employee. So a board and C-suite member would have different levels of competency. But if we look at these 4 different areas that make up the skills and competency, to really look at what good would look like and then really understand the gap from where we are today. So in terms of knowledge, for example, how would you distinguish between different forms of data? Are you familiar with the way that data is stored and collected and structured? Do you grasp the fundamentals of analysis and statistics and when they apply? And do you understand ways to visualize data, as an example? When it comes to skills, reading and understanding visual data, exploring data sets, creating visual displays of data, and then being able to storytell with that data. Some of the key things around attitudes. So I guess you have to have a data mindset and the right attitude, believing that data isn't a language that anybody can learn and speak. Feeling confident is absolutely key to becoming data literates. Do people feel confident working with data? And some of that is through practice, and practice is key. Practicing using data all the time, talking about data all the time, and also considering the ethical uses of data and the impact on society in terms of the attitudes. In terms of behaviours, seeking out and creating data as a means to gathering information and identifying areas of improvement in terms of data and the associated analysis. And in terms of behaviours, we really need to seek out those data heroes within the business. So who are the people that can advocate data for you within the business? So where do we start on our data literacy programme? So I think for me, the key thing is to close the data literacy gap and establish that data-driven culture. We really need to dispel the myth that data scientists are the only people that are qualified to work on data and analytics. Organisations need to create a culture where everybody has the skills and is encouraged to be curious about data. So I'll share my thoughts around the types of things that can be done on the start of a data literacy journey through education and training. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach, and different actions need to be taken for different employees. So the first thing to do, I mentioned, find a senior sponsor. Strong data analytics leadership is absolutely key, plus a board advocate. Find the data heroes in the business. We all have them. Find out who's already using data, manipulating data, and storytell with data, and then really start to build on that so that you've got advocates within the business. Have you got a data strategy? If you haven't, I think you absolutely need a data strategy, a strong data vision that captures the hearts and minds of leaders. And once you've got that, then you can start looking at establishing a baseline. So where are we today in terms of data literacy? And then build a roadmap in terms of how to close this gap. So how can you actually find out where we are today? Well, a few questions that you should be asking. Are your employees comfortable challenging senior leaders about data? How often is data discussed in the boardroom? And how often as a senior data leader are you asked to attend a board meeting to present some insights? How many people in your business do you think can interpret statistical operations such as correlations? How many managers can construct a business case based on accurate and relevant numbers? How many managers can explain the output of their systems? And how many data scientists can explain the output of their machine learning algorithms to the uninitiated? So some of those are questions that really you can start to look at to really understand what you can do to promote data literacy. And once you've established that baseline, you can then start to assess some of the tools that you can use. So I guess some of the principles that I would advocate: keep it simple, take away the jargon. Data literacy in itself is jargon, but really talk the language of data. Remove the ambiguity around some of the terms. So the way that I found doing that is using a data dictionary, have some common language around data, set out some common terms and phrases within the organisation that can be used, and do that using the language that you're used to using in an organisation. Don't use buzzwords, don't use jargon. Listen to how people talk about data and metrics within the organisation and then use those. Create transparency in the analysis that you do. So within a data team, take people with you, allow them to understand what's happening, talk to users about how you've set up the capabilities that you set up, the insights and the reports that you've built with them. So one of the things I did in a previous organisation is we had a click cafe. So we offered some cake at lunchtime. It's always a good incentive to get people in. So give them something, a nice piece of chocolate cake, lunch and learn sessions, stand-up sessions, and encourage people to talk about what they're using, encourage them to talk about the challenges that they've got and the questions that they've got, and just practice using that language. And if you've got those data advocates, ask them to mentor other people and buddy up with them in terms of being able to speak that language of data. Another thing that you might want to do is look at the organisational structure. So is a centre of excellence the best way of doing things? As part of our, I set up a data academy within HomeServe, and initially we had a centre of excellence with a view to moving to a more federated model later. But what I tried to do is find those data heroes within the business who were frustrated because they couldn't have access to the data, bring them into the team, train them in best practice, train them in the tools and the governance, and let them work alongside the data teams in delivering those capabilities, and then send them back out to the business data champions. So I think the organisational design is really, really important to being successful within your data literacy programme. Robust metrics to track performance as well, absolutely key. So if you're going to sell this to data leaders, to your leaders within the C-suite, they will want to know that you can measure this. So how do you track performance? Well, you can track usage of reports, you can track the number of people who've participated in training sessions. There's lots of ways that you can do this. And there's certainly no silver bullet in terms of data literacy, but setting up good quality training programs is really, really key. Some tools here actually that I found that you can use. So portals and blogs. We used Yammer in HomeServe. We had a Yammer group for regular communications, stories, tips and techniques, and that was very much two-way. So if people found a fun thing or something useful, they could share that with their other data users within the organisation. So make sure you've got an active community. Make sure that there's training and coaching programs as well. So within our competency frameworks, when we were at HomeServe, we made sure that data was absolutely fundamental in every single role profile. And that's from a data scientist who needs far greater capability to a C-suite executive who actually just needs to be able to understand data. So there's lots of ways that you can include that within your data and your capability matrices. Informal presentations, peer group meetings, gamification, really good way now to get people geared up and excited about data literacy. So there's lots and lots of tools that you can use to really promote data literacy within your organisation. I'll give you some of the resources and in a second that you can go to and really have a look at the things that you need to do. So just in terms of just summarising then, I'm just conscious of time and I want to give some time to being able to encourage some two-way communication on this and maybe have some questions. But some of the top tips: look at your structure, make sure you've got the right structure in place, make sure you've got strong leadership, make sure you've got a board advocate, make sure that your engagement model is backed by a strong communication plan. So using things like Yammer, looking at ways to communicate that are wider than just the traditional ways. Make sure that you can measure what you're tracking as well, and also make sure that you've got a roadmap so that, and it's tailored by role and also data maturity of people. So the people who are more data mature, you can use those as advocates within the business. So I think if I was going to give anything today, I would say that those are the top tips for being able to develop data literacy in your organisations. I mentioned before a few resources. These are some of the things that you could look at to really start to drive data literacy. So data literacy is one of the big buzzwords at the moment, but really how do you do that? There's some tools there. The Data Literacy Index encourages you to measure your data literacy. You can take some courses, there's some continuous classroom, there's also some data initiatives, as well as some research that would enable you to help drive data literacy in your organisation. Hopefully that's just been interesting today. A few of my thoughts, as I say, I've done this in several organisations. I'm by no means the expert in data literacy, but it's something I feel is absolutely key to driving a data strategy and something I feel quite passionate about. So I guess over to you, Chris, if there's any questions that have come up, or indeed any comments or any thoughts from other people to share with everybody else.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. That was great. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, so any questions? We're not really not had much feedback over the chat box, to be fair, throughout. So we'll just give it a few minutes to allow anyone to ask any questions.
That's either because it's not relevant or I've bored the hell out of people. Hopefully not.
No, not at all. I think, to be fair, I think a lot of people did leave at 1. So I'm guessing people obviously had other things to do at 1. But we'll just give it a few minutes. There we go. So some questions now. Paul Evans. Here we go. So Helen, Paul mentions, he says really interesting, lots of similarities with deployments he's done. He asked, do you think data is the new IT, and will it eventually evolve roles like business analysts adapted to data?
Yeah, I think so. I think the role of the business analyst, and certainly the data analyst, almost becomes absorbed in everybody's role now, because I think everybody has to almost analyze data to a certain degree. So I think those roles have evolved. I found within my roles, traditionally, I had a very traditional BI model. So you'd have this prioritization. You go through a process of prioritizing the things that you do first, and then you get your BA to go out and talk to people within the organization, define what that would be, and then you go away and build it. We don't work like that anymore. Everybody's moving more towards a data ops approach. So actually, everybody's sitting in the room together, talking about what is the outcome that we're trying to produce? What's the minimum viable that we need to do? And then really start to break it down and start to iterate that with users. So I think the roles of business analysts have changed and system analysts have changed, because everybody really is sitting together in a room working through the data problem from a data ops way, if I use those buzzwords. So I think things have changed as we've moved to a more agile approach of BI delivery. I don't know whether that answers the question. It's a bit hard when it's one way, but feel free to jump on and discuss.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. A lot of people have said that, but I think the floodgates are open now in terms of questions. Next, we've got Rob Lancashire. He said, really interesting. He thanks you for your talk. So his question is, obviously, you say people are too busy to do all this currently. He asked, what are the best ways you find to sell the concept to the board level stakeholders?
Get them interested in a specific business problem, I would say. So find a use case that is relevant to them. So something that is absolutely key to the strategy. So for example, I had a use case where we were changing our employee reward mechanism with our engineers, and we were moving from a bonus related pay to basically a balanced scorecard, and we would reward people retrospectively. However, to get that balanced scorecard, we needed to get the data into the system. So it was absolutely key for the operations director to work with my team to really understand and get interested in data. And we made it quite sexy as well. So we made sure that it was accessible on their mobiles and on their tablets. So we could give them the dashboard so that every engineer on the ground could actually see how they were doing. We made it into a bit of a game as well, so we got some gamification going. It was advocated from the field operations director. It was rolled out through the organisation, and because it was absolutely key and something that was relevant to them, they got interested. You have to always make things apply to the business problems. So unless you're solving a problem within the business, you'll never get people interested.
Great, thanks, Helen. Next, we've got Alex Hill. He asks, how do you deal with resistance to change or staff unwilling to adapt, etc.?
That's a great question, isn't it? I mean, cultural change, I think, is a separate topic of its own right. I think the way I've done it previously is, if you imagine the change curve, there's always the people that are going to come along with you, and there's always the people that will be the resistors. So always find the data heroes within the business, find the advocates within the business who really want to work with you to actually make that change. And actually, don't bother as much with the guys who are never going to come. You've got to work with the data heroes. You've got to work with those guys who actually want to come along with you. Having a good, strong use case, I think, is always helpful, and also celebrating your successes. The more you celebrate your successes, the more people want to be part of a shiny new big thing. So if you can celebrate your successes as well, I think that's always helpful.
Yeah, great. It's okay. And so I think finally then we have Catherine Wilkes. So she mentioned that you mentioned that data literacy should form part of a digital transformation. Why does this have to be the case, and what happens if you don't have a digital strategy to piggyback on?
I guess, well, if you have digital transformation, I think the only way that will be effective is if people know how to interpret the data that's coming out of digital transformation. So if it's absolutely key that people have to be data literate. If you don't, but you don't have to have a digital transformation program, because clearly they're not mutually exclusive. So if you have if you've got data within your business, you can still have a data literacy program. It doesn't have to be part of a digital transformation program. However, if you do have one, it's absolutely key that an enabler to that is making sure that people understand the data that's coming out of it.
Great. Perfect. So I mean, I think that's it for questions. So just going back to Paul's question, he says that he agrees data ops is the future, but doesn't believe most companies are there yet. But yeah, obviously thanks you for answering the question, and I think that's that wraps us up really. So again, big thanks to Helen for today's session. I found it really interesting. I'm sure, I mean, from just judging off the comments, I think everyone else did as well. So really appreciate you joining us. And obviously, if you have any more questions anyone might have, feel free to contact Helen directly or myself. Feel free. The slides aren't up anymore, so don't worry about it. It's fine. But like I say, the next session will be on Thursday the 10th with Matt Tubb. It's on the meetup page, so feel free to join the meetup page and you'll see all the future events. As mentioned, obviously, my name's Chris Ingman. If you are looking to expand your team, to hire in your team, alternatively, if you're looking for a job, please get in touch. That's it from me. So have a great weekend. Try to have a great weekend. Obviously, with the current lockdown situation, it's tricky, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot.